What happens when left-wing corruption gets so bad that even the legacy media is forced to call it out? I mean, look at this headline. A volcano of controversy has hit the Minnesota Somali community. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. None other than Margaret Brennan confronted the ultra-repulsive Ilhan Omar in an interview that's exploding the internet as we speak. And we're going to see precisely why, after this past Sunday, there's no going back. This Somali scandal is just beginning. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, here to help you make sense of the madness as the far left desperately tries to stop the unstoppable rise of a new conservative age that you're making happen all over the world. So if you want a front row seat on how you're changing the world in ways you never even imagined, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. What a weekend. What a Sunday morning newscast. You know things are bad if you're a Democrat when you've lost Margaret Brennan. Right? Margaret Brennan have defaced the nation, as Rush used to call it, and for good reason. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent just dropped a bomb that has the left in absolute panic mode. The money didn't just disappear in Minneapolis. It went overseas. And the Trump administration isn't just auditing the books. They're launching a full-scale sweep.
A lot of money has been transferred from the individuals who committed this fraud, including those who donated to the governor, donated to Representative Omar, and donated to A.G. Ellison. But they've been transferred to something called MBSs. And those are...
Mortgage-backed security? What do you mean?
Sorry?
Transferred to what?
These are money the Bureau services, and they are wire transfer organizations that are outside the regulated banking system. And that money has gone overseas, and we are tracking that both to the Middle East and to Somalia to see what the uses of that have been.
Okay, but you have no evidence of that money being used to fuel terrorism at this point, which is what some conservative writers are alleging.
That's why it's an investigation. We started it last week. We'll see where it goes. But I can tell you that, it's terrible. Representative Omar tried to downplay it, said, it was very, it was very tough to know how this money should be used. Yeah. She was gaslighting the American people.
Well, we'll talk to her.
Yeah, but when you come to this country, you got to learn which side of the road to drive on. You got to learn to stop at stop signs, and you got to learn not to defraud the American people.
That was brilliant. This is exactly what's sinking the modern day left. They are insisting, as we'll see with Ilhan Omar, they're insisting that the demand, the unconditional demand that migrants assimilate into our culture, into the culture of the host country, they're doubling down on the notion that that's racist. That insistence that you assimilate is bigoted, xenophobic. It's the very definition of the 80-20 doom loop. Literally 90% of the nation supports that demand for assimilation for the very reasons that Scott Bessent just cited. If you're going to come into our country, you're going to have to obey our laws. That's a biblical command for foreigners who came into ancient Israel. Foreigners were required by God to obey Israel's laws. The modern day left is actually trying to recast that as bigoted and racist. And that gaslighting is all but guaranteeing their downfall. Make sure to check out my video later on today on the latest polling that just came out, showing that the Democrats are in a literal free fall. They're entering 2026 in perhaps the single most disastrous polling position in history. Wait until you see that. Make sure to check that out later today. But let's back up. The Department of Justice called it the largest pandemic fraud scheme in the nation's history. We're talking about $250 million, some estimate up to several billion, meant to feed hungry children. And instead, it bought luxury cars, lakefront real estate, lavish vacations, potentially was sent overseas to terrorist organizations. And so this brings us to the interview that has everyone talking. Ilhan Omar went on Deface the Nation expecting a friendly chat. And instead, she got grilled on why this fraud happened in her backyard, and her answers were nothing short of dumbfounding.
So this was, just for our audience, the Biden-era Justice Department called it the largest COVID fraud scheme in the country. And this was pocketing COVID-era welfare funds, more than $1 billion in taxpayer money that was stolen. It was pretty shocking.
Stop. Did you notice the little improv that Margaret gave there? This was over $1 billion of fraud, $1 billion of stolen taxpayer money, and she couldn't help herself. She called it absolutely shocking, which it is. It is shocking. This is stuff you read about coming out of third world countries where governments are so corrupt, they're fleecing their tax-paying populations to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. Well, that's happening right now in Ilhan Omar's backyard, in her very district. And even Deface the Nation is starting to realize how insane this corruption is.
It was pretty shocking. Of the 87 people charged, all but 8 are of Somali descent. And that has added to the spotlight being put specifically on your community. Why do you think this fraud was allowed to get so widespread?
Well, I want to say, this also has an impact on Somalis because we are also taxpayers in Minnesota. We also could have benefited from the program and the money that was stolen. And so it's been really frustrating for people to not acknowledge the fact that we're also as Minnesotans, as taxpayers, really upset and angry about the fraud that has occurred.
Mm-hmm. 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 That's Margaret's way of trying to make sense of that total nonsensical answer she just got. What Ilhan Omar just gave you there was clearly a Democrat talking point. But Omar is too stupid to figure out how to drop or where to drop that talking point. She was asked point blank, why was this fraud allowed to get so widespread? Again, we're talking billions of dollars here. Billions! How did the fraud get so widespread? And Omar's answer was, well, we Somalis are frustrated because we couldn't have benefited from the program too, so we're pretty upset too. We're pretty angry too. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Again, that was Margaret realizing that something very, very fishy is going on. That was Margaret realizing that Trump is right about Ilhan. When you're asked point blank about how the corruption got so widespread, and you're treated to a totally irrelevant Democrat talking point, you're suddenly realizing that you're sitting across from the fraud. The fraud was allowed to get so widespread precisely because of the very person you're sitting across from. Because,
as you know, one of the initial defenses by the organization at the heart of the fraud, Feeding Our Future, was to claim the probe was due to racism. Do you think that this was all about negligence or that it was like political fear of alienating the Somali community?
So you have to remember that the woman who led the program is a Caucasian woman. Mm-hmm. And that was her way of making sure that this would continue to happen by using whatever rhetoric that was available to her. We do know that when the money was stopped, they did sue. The AG, Attorney General Keith Ellison, defended the department in that lawsuit. It was a judge that said it should continue, that money should continue to go out. And so this wasn't something that people were not looking at. There was always those alarms, and we will continue to understand where things might have gone wrong as these investigations continue and as these fraudsters are prosecuted and sent to jail.
Once again, we're seeing a masterclass in deflection. The vast majority of those indicted and or convicted in this fraud scheme are Somali descent. Prosecutors say about 86 people have been charged thus far, 61 convictions. The New York Times' own report found that all but eight of those 86 individuals charged in these related fraud cases are of Somali descent. That's 78 out of 86. Do your math. That's 91% of the charge. Why is she singling out the lone white woman? Again, we're staring in the face of a Democrat talking point. We're staring in the face of Democrat corruption. But it gets worse. Ilhan Omar gets asked about the question of assimilation, about why this specific community seems so isolated and vulnerable to this kind of corruption. Wait until you see this answer. But first, do you know what the new thing is among the ultra wealthy? Do you know where so many of them are putting their money these days? They're moving their funds into limited supply crypto assets that thrive during economic volatility. And so the simple question is here, gang, what are you waiting for? I mean, when are you going to bite the bullet and finally get into what many are calling the biggest wealth opportunity in human history? Well, if you're ready to take that step, meet your best new friend, Black Trust IRA, a groundbreaking government-approved crypto solution that's redrawing the map for generational wealth protection, letting you invest just like the rich elite. Their Animus AI platform has crushed the market, outperforming Bitcoin by over 250% since 2022, giving you the powerful tools needed to protect your future. Don't let the rich get richer while your savings dwindle away. Head to TurleyTalksCrypto.com right now and talk to a wealth protection expert. And when you open an account with them, you'll get a free $2,500 funding bonus to use right away. It's amazing stuff. Don't wait on this, gang. That's TurleyTalksCrypto.com to secure your family's future today.
I want to ask you about something else that the architect of the president's immigration policy, Stephen Miller, said. On Thanksgiving Day, he posted, "No magic transformation occurs when failed states cross borders. At scale, migrants and their descendants recreate the conditions and terrors of their broken homelands." What do you make of this argument of failure to assimilate and sort of ruining America? How do you understand this?
I mean, when I think about Stephen Miller and his white supremacist rhetoric, it reminds me of the way the Nazis described Jewish people in Germany. And, you know, as we know, there have been many immigrants who have tried to come to the United States who've turned back, one of them being Jewish immigrants. We know the way that people were described who were coming from Ireland, Irish immigrants. We know the way in which people were described back then when they were Italian immigrants. And to me, you know, we're yes, of course, ethnically Somali. We are in this country as Americans. Yeah. We are citizens. We are productive part of this nation, and we will continue to be.
Congresswoman Omar, thank you for your time today.
So there it is. There it is. There you have it. When you can't explain where your money went, when you can't account for how the fraud got so widespread, when you can't defend the very racist rhetoric that your own community has been using to deflect attention away from their blatant corruption, you call your opponents Nazis. You refuse to assimilate into the culture, and anyone who demands that you do is a Nazi fascist. I mean, you know the old saying, right? The first person who compares somebody to Hitler loses the argument, right? The first person who brings up Hitler loses the argument. That's the Democrat Party today. They are the party that has fundamentally lost the argument. Hence why they are turning more and more to violence, right? This turn to violence, we've talked about this a lot on the channel, this turn to violence by the radical left that we're seeing over and over again is actually an admission. They know they've lost. They know the vast majority of the country has united against them. And so they've stopped trying to convince. They've stopped trying to persuade. And that historically always represents the death rattle of a political movement. Radical violence is the turn that follows obvious failure. It's an acknowledgement of political impotence and a last-ditch emergency reflex. We saw this in the 1960s with the rise of the New Left movement. So after sort of the idealism of the hippie movement began to fade and the rise of Nixon, you saw the rise of the new left movement, like the Weather Underground, that turned to violence during those Nixon years. This is why Attorney General Pam Bondi is launching an investigation into left-wing extremist groups across the nation. She's openly acknowledging that we're not dealing with a political party anymore. We're dealing with what President Trump calls radical left-wing terrorism. And we need to use the full force of the law to eradicate it in every way possible. But again, the key here is that they've completely lost the argument. And the Democrats are now, they're basically becoming nothing less than a domestic terrorist organization. And the Trump administration is taking action on the ground in the face of this. There is, as we speak, a massive law enforcement operation underway in Minneapolis. This isn't just about deporting people who cut the line. This is a targeted sweep looking for the criminals behind this fraud and those with potential terror ties. And this is just the beginning. I mean, think about it. We still have another 3 years and 1 month to go with this. Until then, I mean, more and more voters are realizing the real fraud in all of this. For 4 years, we were told diversity is our strength, even when integration failed. We were told no human is illegal, even when criminals exploited our generosity. The Feeding Our Future scandal proves that when you have unvetted migration combined with massive government handouts and zero oversight, you don't get a multicultural paradise. You get a crime scene. Ilhan Omar said that if this money did go to terrorism, she claimed it would be a failure of the FBI. Well, she's right about one thing. The old FBI certainly did fail. The old administration failed. They let $250 million walk out the door because they were too afraid of being called racist by the likes of Ilhan Omar to check the receipts. But those days are over. The audit is coming. The deportations are starting. And for the first time in a very long time, the American taxpayer is finally being put first. Do you want to ask me your biggest questions and maybe win free merch while you're at it? Well, join my Courageous Patriot Club and be part of the uncensored Monday night Q&A, all for only $10 a month at turley.pub/club.